Why does Jonathan Kent seem to be the only decent father in this series? My good pals! Thanks for joining me once again. I am Nuv the Poet, and welcome back to my channel. Yes, it is that time to continue my Smallville series retrospective, jumping into Season 3, meaning we are basically a third of the way through the entire show. While it has been quite a journey so far, Season 3 takes us to a whole new level. And while I want to just dive right in, before I do, I have to say that I have never really been as big a fan of the earlier seasons, specifically seasons 1 through 3, as I have been of the later seasons. That's not to say I didn't enjoy them, but I just don't like them as much, so I don't rewatch them as often as I do the later seasons, which means that going into season 3, I did not remember a lot that happened this season, so it was kind of exciting to see what was going to happen and how the story plays out. And there is a lot that happens, a lot that gets set up from the season 2 finale. Quick recap. Clark and Lana finally get together, Chloe finds out and decides to turn on her best friend and work for Lionel to investigate Clark. Martha is pregnant, Helen and Lex get married. Jor-El, Clark's father, is telling Clark he must leave Smallville to pursue his destiny, but Clark doesn't want this. So he uses a kryptonite key Lionel made to destroy his ship, but it blows up, hurting the Kents and causing Martha to lose her baby. Clark then puts on a red kryptonite ring and runs away while Lex goes on his honeymoon with Helen, only to wake up on his plane, no Helen, no pilot, and no parachute, and the plane crashes. So with all that drama and strife, what happens to these characters next? Let's get into it, starting with episode 1, Exile. So we start off in Metropolis with a 3-month time jump. Clark is walking around in a black shirt, so we know he's bad, steals money from an ATM, and buys an expensive car. We see a newspaper article that Lex is dead. Wait, Lex is dead? But wait, how? He's supposed to be in the future as Clark's enemy. How does this show even continue? I mean, it makes sense he crashed in a plane, but what? Anyway, Clark goes by Cal around people here and brings a girl with him to a club, but when she questions the mark by Jor-El, he gets defensive and angry and she leaves. Cal doesn't care though. But then Cal starts feeling pain from this mark and he runs into a phone booth. He takes off the red K ring and the pain stops. He then calls his mom but doesn't say anything. She urges him to come home, but he just hangs up and puts the ring back on. Okay, pause. 2 things. First of all, Clark goes into a phone booth. Get the reference? Because Clark often goes into a phone booth to change into his Superman costume in other Superman media. You get it. Anyway, the other thing I want to mention is this mark that Clark has. It's never explained why it causes him pain sometimes and why taking the ring off stops the pain. I don't fully understand it and it doesn't get explored at all. That is kind of the whole story of Jor-El and how he treats Clark though. He doesn't give reasoning other than vague comments about Clark's destiny. Frankly, I don't think the creators really thought much about what Jor-El meant because it was just a way to create an antagonist for Clark and build his journey to becoming Superman. So Clark interrupts a bank robbery and wrecks all of the bad guys wearing a really bad mask. And I get it, he doesn't need to hide really, so why not? But it looks so silly. A cool note is that when Clark super speeds, there's a streak of red, probably from the red K. I mean, it's just for a cool special effect, but my thought is it's meant to show his red K influence. Back at the Kent farm, Pete shows Ma and Pa Kent a newspaper story about a guy who robbed a bank, pointing out it's Clark. Jonathan insists on going to get him, but Martha says there's nothing they can do. Lana and Chloe are at the Talon, with Lana clearly distraught about Clark being gone, and Chloe insisting that Lana needs to move on, but Lana refuses. Clark is visited by some goons while he's sleeping, and they unload tons of bullets on him while he's in bed, but of course, he dodges and tosses them. The crime lord Morgan Edge, a known DC character, then enters Clark's abode. He asks Clark for help, but Clark blows him off. Lionel then calls Chloe to the caves, and the two have a chat about Clark and Chloe's investigation of him. She explains that there isn't more she can give since Clark ran off. Lionel threatens her job at the planet and talks about decisions and consequences. I'll get into it more, but I do like Chloe's story this season of being tangled up in Lionel's web. It gives her a real story that we haven't seen for her yet. We then transition to an island where we see Lex. He's alive! He's alive! He's in bad shape. A lot of wounds on his body, his skin peeling. He has malaria according to his island buddy, some guy named Lewis, who is there too. Not sure who this is, but okay. Lex is apparently stranded on this island. Lewis is telling Lex that he shouldn't want to go back home because his father and Helen were probably in cahoots. They were cahooting, which doesn't feel too far-fetched. It's interesting that a complete stranger can so easily pick up on the twisted dynamics of the Luthor family. Lionel is giving a speech at Lex's funeral since everyone thinks he's dead. Remember that, which, by the way, his sorrow feels so hollow. But anyway, Lana detects something and turns around to see Clark far back viewing the funeral. She runs through the crowd to see him, but by the time she gets closer, he's gone. And then Helen shows up at the funeral, which, how? She had to be involved then, right? She just happened to survive? That seems unlikely. We'll explore that later. Chloe shows up at Clark's place, which, how did she know he was there? But tries to tell Clark to come home, that Lana is worried, his parents are losing the farm, but then Clark's mark activates, I guess, causing him pain again. I don't know how to describe it, and he sends Chloe away. Helen just bought a whole new wardrobe and got her hair done and gets confronted by Lionel already in the mansion. Lionel recounts Helen's story that Lex gave Helen the last and only parachute to Helen to save her life, valiantly giving up his own. Lex sees a plane flying overhead but can't get its attention, and Lewis attacks him, saying this is where he belongs. Clark comes back to the barn to look around when he hears Martha and Jonathan checking to make sure they're all packed up and ready to leave the farm. Martha breaks down, but Jonathan comforts her, reminding her what she has said to him before when they found out they couldn't conceive, saying they'll have happy days again. These two, my goodness, they are such an aspirational couple and aspirational parents. Their bond, their love, it's so beautiful. These two are a huge reason why I'm even doing this series retrospective, because they are so pivotal to Clark being Superman and exploring who they are as people and the impact and influence that has on how Clark is raised and the values he carries throughout his life, especially when using his abilities and choosing to save people. It's powerful. It's the essence of Superman. At the Talon, Lana and Chloe talk about Clark once again, and Lana expresses regret for not going with Clark in the season finale when given the choice. She wants to search for Clark, and Chloe finally tells her she found him 2 months ago. Lana is upset, understandably, and goes to find him. And find him she does, riding his motorcycle. Clark tells her to hop on, and this time, she does. Back on the island, Lex finds a skeleton with a necklace with LL on it. Lewis says it's his dad. It was inevitable because only one could survive. His dad, a rich and powerful man, was always criticizing Lewis, chipping away until there was nothing left. That sounds a lot like Lex's story. Lewis then attacks Lex, looking to end his whole career.
I'm about to end this man's whole career.
But Lex gets away for now. In Metropolis, Clark takes Lana to the club and she sees the way he's acting, so she decides to call his parents. Clark catches her and talks to them. He's pretty harsh with his words, calling him John instead of Dad, saying they're happy he's gone, that they're not his parents and never will be. Lana tells Clark she loves him, and he asks if she always betrays the ones she loves. Some really cruel words that are all stemming from his own guilt and pain for his mistakes. Jonathan decides to go to Metropolis to get Clark. How? I don't know. But he grabs the key. Clark decides to accept Morgan Edge's offer so he can get funds and disappear. He has to steal something from Lionel Luthor. Lex is being hunted by Lewis, who has a machete, and the two get into a fight. Lex gets a hold of the weapon and attacks Lewis. Someone finds Lex on the island, and Lex is defending his actions, saying he had to kill Lewis, only for the guy to question who Lex is talking about. Lex turns back around to reveal nothing. No one. Lewis was a figment of Lex's imagination this whole time. Jonathan is at the caves with the key. He starts yelling at Jor-El about how Clark wasn't ready. The key starts to glow and float and inserts itself into the slot. The symbols light up, the key opens up, and a beam strikes Jonathan. Jor-El talks to Jonathan, and the two fathers argue about their parental ownership. Jor-El explains how this was Clark's first test to see if he was ready for the next phase of his journey. Jonathan says he'll do anything for his son, and then the light consumes him. Clark breaks into Luthor Corp, breaks into the vault, and steals something. It's a box, but we don't know what's in it. Jonathan then shows up somehow. Seriously, how did he get there so quickly? Metropolis is 3 hours away or something? Jonathan steps in front of Clark, but Clark pushes Jonathan across the room into a wall. But Jonathan gets back up, no problem. Jonathan then super speeds at Clark, and the two go crashing through the window and plummeting down many, many stories, and we get a to be continued. So let's continue with episode 2, Phoenix. We pick up right where the last episode ended, with Jonathan and Clark falling out the Luthor Corp window. They go through glass and fall into some heavy equipment or machinery. I don't know what it is. These two are fighting, and goodness, this is a brutal fight. The fighting isn't even clean. Jonathan shoves Clark into a gigantic pillar which breaks on impact, but as pieces fall, one hits Jonathan in the head. They did a great job of making this fight real, as in not feel choreographed. Obviously it was, but the struggle between Jonathan and Clark felt more organic and natural than fights sometimes do in this show and in media in general, so I appreciated that a lot. Jonathan is getting the best of Clark a few times, and it kind of makes sense when you think about it. Jonathan is a tough man. He was an athlete, and he's way more experienced than Clark. He's even mentioned having gotten into fights in the past. Now that he's on a level playing field with Clark, he can keep up with him and seemingly best him. However, Clark gets Jonathan by the throat, and Jonathan tells him to end it.
If I could raise a son that could kill, then kill!
Clark goes for the final blow, but punches the wall instead, shattering the red K ring. Then the mark on Clark's chest disappears. I don't get why or what the point of it was, but sure. There's also a fleeting glow that leaves Jonathan, probably symbolizing him losing the powers Jor-El gave him. Jonathan and Clark reach home, Clark hugging Martha, but Jonathan is shown to be wounded and weak. He collapses. Clark speculates that whatever Jor-El did was too much for Jonathan's body to handle. Actions have consequences, and I fear there will be severe ones for Jonathan because of this. Back at Luthor Corp, Lionel is surveying the scene when Lex makes a grand entrance by spouting off some biblical parable about how Abraham threw Isaac on the pyre to prove his faith to God. Because Of course, he has to monologue and then ask Lionel what his excuse was, accusing Lionel of attempting to kill him. Lex pulls a gun on Lionel. Lex questions Lionel about what happened to Helen, and Lionel informs Lex she's chilling at his place. Lionel recounts Helen's version of the story to Lex and explains how she benefited the most from Lex's death, not Lionel. And then he tells Lex to ask Helen what happened to the blood sample after he gave it to her. Which, what does that vial of blood have to do with anything? Clark and Jonathan are in the caves, and Clark is talking about how he's not sure he wants his life back. But Jonathan explains that no matter how difficult things are, at least they get to do it as a family. This is another major lesson that Clark takes time to learn, that he doesn't have to do everything on his own, especially carry the emotional burdens. But Clark thinks that because he's so powerful, he should be able to solve anything and everything by himself. He needs to learn that he's allowed to let people help him and that not everything falls on his shoulders. Clark shows Jonathan what he stole from Lionel, and it's the vial of Clark's blood. How did Lionel get it? From Helen? Man is always scheming. But also, why did Morgan Edge want the vial? Speaking of, Morgan is meeting with Lionel, and we find out that Morgan bribed Helen. Apparently, this was to get the vial to sell it back to Lionel for a lot more money. Edge subtly threatens Lionel, but Lionel responds that he has the evidence. What evidence? I don't know. And that the statute of limitations on murder never runs out. What murder is he talking about? Lex's? Because that didn't happen. I don't know. We'll find out later, though. Clark goes to see Lana at the Talon, and the two have a heated exchange where Lana explains that the only thing hurting her has been Clark. Clark tells Lana he may not even stay in Smallville. Then there's this cool shot after Lana goes into the back through a swinging door, where the door swings back and forth, and you see Lana crying in between the moments of the door blocking the view. I thought that was a really cool artistic choice. Lex surprises Helen at the mansion, and Helen feigns concern. Helen tells the real story, I am now completely suspicious of her, how she couldn't wake Lex up because he drank too much of the champagne that was drugged for both of them. She only had a sip, so it wore off sooner, apparently. And then she just dipped? She left him to die? Wow. Even if I believed her story, that is awful. You just abandoned your husband, didn't even bother to attempt to take him with you, or maybe stay with him till death do you part and all that? Come on, Helen. Helen says Lionel promised to leave them alone if she gave him the vial, but can see Lex doesn't buy it, so decides to leave. Back at the farm, Edge visits Clark. Edge wants his package, but Clark denies having it. Edge threatens to call the police, and Clark plays up the Cal character, ripping the door off its hinges and yanking Edge out of the car, threatening him. And so they leave him alone for now. Clark goes to see Chloe, and there's still tension there. Not romantic though, but real tension, because Chloe had to endure Clark's attitude even though she remained loyal. I do find this moment and this season overall to be a major turning point for their friendship. Chloe doesn't just stop having feelings for him, but she mostly puts them aside and is just a really great friend to Clark. Even at this moment, after getting upset with him first, she still chooses to be there for him as he wrestles with the idea of leaving. I enjoy their friendship so much. Lex comes to see Clark at the farm and the two embrace. It's a genuinely sweet moment, and it feels nice that Clark has one friend who isn't frustrated with him. Even with all my critiquing, I will say that these two do have a true friendship, one that has been well built and properly established, so moments like these are truly comforting to see for these characters. Lex then tells Helen he wants to give the honeymoon another shot. Just don't go on any more planes, my dude. Meanwhile, at the farm, Morgan Edge shows up and has Clark's parents at gunpoint. Clark gives them some of his blood by cutting himself with kryptonite. Edge then takes it to Lionel, but explains how he could give Lionel the source, which intrigues Lionel, of course. So Lionel doesn't know about Clark, but it seems he has his suspicions because Lionel says his contact was uncooperative. See, he definitely thinks there's something about Clark. Lana shows up at the farm as Clark is being taken to Edge, and she fights off Edge's goon, the goon getting killed in the process. Accidentally. Lana didn't do it on purpose, so she's free of any murders for now. Lex, why? Why did you decide to fly again? That's where we go next in the story. Lex starts cracking jokes about not taking a drink and Helen waking up to find Lex gone. Lex confronts Helen and tells what he believes is the real story of Helen having the pilot killed and replaced them with one of her own, paid him to touch down and drop her off, then fly back up and leave Lex on the plane. Helen finally admits to wanting to kill Lex, saying that the reason he didn't catch a bullet that day was because she truly does love him. The two wrestle for the gun and a bullet goes off, hitting and I believe killing the pilot. Lex then takes control of the plane because he apparently knows how to pilot it, and Helen escapes, jumping out. The truck carrying Clark reaches Edge and Lionel, so the goons taped kryptonite to Clark to keep him wounded, but somehow Clark was able to remove the kryptonite and then escape, blowing up the truck, making Lionel think Edge attempted to kill him. Edge gets shot and falls into the river. Lionel and Lex recount the events on the plane, and Helen is just gone. I'm not sure what the point of her story was, and her shift to betraying Lex feels out of place and so random. She seemed like a decent person for all of season 2, and then out of nowhere turns against him for money? I guess? Whatever. We shall never see Helen again. Spoiler, Lex then tells Lionel he wants to return to Luthor Corp, and Lionel accepts. Then the two hug, which feels so disingenuous. Lex goes to the Kent farm and tells the Kents that he bought the farm and put the Kents' names on the deed. He tells Jonathan that the compass he gave Lex as a wedding present helped guide him to safety and survive. Lex explains that he just wants to be considered part of the family. Bold move, Lex. Jonathan gives a small expression of acceptance. Kinda. Lana visits Clark to let him know that she wants to know him, giving him a chance to open up again so they can move forward. But Clark pulls away again, saying he can't be the right guy for her and that it won't work. So she leaves. And that is the immediate fallout from the season 2 finale. I honestly didn't think these 2 episodes were great, but they were solid and set up quite a bit for the season. Firstly, we're entering into a new phase of the Clark and Lana relationship. In season 1, the two were only starting to get to know each other, and the romance was just blossoming. Season 2 was the will they won't they situation, and now season 3, in the aftermath of them no longer being together, which they only were for a couple of days, maybe? Like, Clark never took Lana out on a date even. They just made out a lot. But anyway, the issue of trust and reliability has grown from the previous season, creating a lot of distance between them. Jonathan going to great lengths to bring Clark back may have unforeseen consequences. I mean, we saw him collapse after he lost those powers. Who knows what lasting impact this could have on him going forward. And Jonathan isn't the only one likely to face lasting consequences, as Lex's time on the island could have just been a hallucination due to malaria, or it could manifest into something greater. This traumatic experience could have severe effects on his mental health, and it's also led him to be put right back under Lionel's thumb by choosing to work at Luthor Corp again. Lex's story honestly is a tragedy, and part of me feels bad, but part of me doesn't, because he makes bad decisions often. Lionel seems to be getting closer and closer to finding out Clark's secret, and this continues this season. He's even more conniving and manipulative. I know, how is that possible? But he is. And he's still got this arrangement with Chloe, which will play out in a compelling way. Speaking of Chloe, her decisions will definitely come back to haunt her because there is no easy escape from Lionel. He made that clear to her during their conversation in the caves. I'm excited to get into her story, honestly, but all in due time, because for now, we move on to episode 3, Extinction. I can't explain why, but for some reason, I have such a vivid memory of this episode. Basically, someone is hunting kryptonite-infected people. Initially, they save Lana from some guy at school who likes her, but then attempts to drown her when she goes swimming at the pool. Not sure that's the best way to attract a woman, but again, what do I know? He gets shot and killed, and a rock with the word freak on it is left at the scene. Clark suspects it's this guy, John Tucker, and that he must die for his crimes. Sorry, but Clark is right that it is this character, Van McNulty. Van is after kryptonite-infected people because his father was killed by one, Tina Greer. Remember Tina, the shapeshifter? Also one of the first people to be obsessed with Lana, so obsessed she impersonated Whitney. Remember Whitney? Of course you don't. Who could blame you? Whitney was Lana's former boyfriend who went off to join the Marines. So, Tina, pretending to be Whitney, killed the lieutenant. He was a lieutenant. Anyway, he was going to tell Whitney's mom about Whitney being killed in action. That lieutenant was Van's dad. I love this simple way of tying things together and making previous events like this matter. Anyway, next, Van targets Lex because we find out he's using Chloe's database of potential wall of weird persons, and Lex was in her files because he miraculously survived that car crash. Van attempts to shoot Lex outside Luthor Corp, but Clark saves the day, catching the bullet, which Van witnesses. When Clark attempts to stop Van, he tackles him and knocks kryptonite out of Van's backpack, exposing his weakness to Van. I do like that Van puts it together. We've seen Clark wince and be in pain in front of others around kryptonite, and they just don't figure it out. But Van does immediately. This puts Clark in Van's crosshairs. Literally. Van makes kryptonite bullets and then shoots Clark in a really cool scene where Clark's super speed kicks in as he watches the bullet fly at him. He puts his hand out to stop it, it goes right through, and then he watches it go into his shoulder. His parents get the bullet out, but Clark is unconscious. Van goes to tell Lana about Clark, and she kicks him down some stairs and calls the police, telling them Clark has been murdered. But then she gets taken by Van. Clark calls out Van via the police radio and they meet at the school. Van loads an entire clip of bullets on Clark and he just takes it, with Lana totally able to see this. Clark goes to fight Van, but Lana stands up and whoops him, kicking him into glass. Clark was wearing a lead plate to shield himself from the bullets. Smart move. There are a few moments in this episode that are pretty interesting in regards to the Lana-Clark dynamic. Early on, Clark is questioning the shooter's motives, upsetting Lana since she almost died, and she says life would be much better if the meteor shower never happened. This definitely discourages Clark from being open to Lana about his secret. But at the end of the episode, she tells Clark that if he was infected, it would be okay. Now, he isn't, but I imagine she'd feel the same way about him being an alien. This does make me wonder slightly why Clark wouldn't tell her there. He is literally being told that he can be open with her. My thought is that Clark at this point is still quite immature emotionally. For all his upbringing by the Kents, the fact that he has had to keep this secret his whole life and therefore keep his distance from people emotionally may have made him less comfortable or capable of being open with them, even when he's shown he can be. And I'm sure that his parents have told him many times throughout his life the potential risk and danger of letting people know the secret. And while they did it for his and their best interests, it may have hurt his emotional growth. Lionel shows up at the Torch at night again, he makes a really bad habit of being in a high school at night with a teenager by herself. It's creepy, but he threatens Chloe about investigating his family because of the danger it put Lex in. Well, that and probably because Lionel has far too many skeletons in his closet. But what I'm really intrigued by is the mess Chloe has gotten herself into. She's now in too deep with Lionel, and he pretty much has her under his complete control. It's intimidating and scary to think what he can do with this power and influence. I'm not sure how she's gonna get out of this mess. One last thing. Chloe and Clark reconcile, and their friendship is on the mend now. Overall, a really good episode. It is, however, followed up by an okay episode, episode 4, Slumber. In this episode, Clark faces a dangerous new foe, sleep deprivation. Clark is having these vivid dreams, which include a girl he has never met before, who turns out to be a girl who has been in a coma and just moved into Lana's house next to Clark with her uncle, her caretaker. She inherited her parents' money, and her uncle is keeping her sedated. That plot is nothing special. What is really cool though is that the episode opens up with Clark in a dream, and that dream, which includes skinny dipping with Lana, seeing Chloe give up the wall of weird, and Lex attacking Clark with a sword to confirm his suspicions about Clark's secret, takes up 15 minutes of the episode. And there's no indication it's a dream. The scenes play out as if it's a normal episode, though something does feel off. I thought that was really cool structuring of the episode. Clark was knocked out for a day and a half, by the way. That's wild. The real story of the episode is that Lionel wants Lex to get a psychological evaluation after everything that has happened to him on the island. Honestly, Lionel doesn't feel genuine, but Lex definitely needs therapy, and not just because of this recent traumatic experience. He needs therapy because of Lionel. Initially, Lex refuses, but in order to show his commitment to Lionel about working together at Loathe Corp, he ultimately agrees to do it. So hey, good on you, Lex. Listen, I'm in therapy. It's a great thing, but you gotta be willing to be open and vulnerable and do the work to get better. Seriously, it may sound like a PSA, but if you need help of any kind, highly consider starting therapy. You don't need to be depressed or in the worst situation imaginable to start. It helps a lot to have someone help you work through the thoughts and feelings that we sometimes can't express, understand, or even realize are affecting us. If you have questions about it, feel free to leave them in the comments. I'd actually really love to do a video about being in therapy if people would be interested. And this is not some sponsorship thing. It's just me expressing my appreciation for therapy and how it's helped me. Back to the episode. The last thing I'll say is that while I like Lana and Clark, I'm not the biggest Klana shipper. But for some reason, this episode made me understand why people would like them together. They have chemistry. They have a vibe. They feel like they fit. Of course, there are a lot of issues between them, but I can see why some fans are so on board for this pairing. But like I said, not a strong episode, but it was fun. Now we go on to a great episode. Episode 5, Perry. As the name suggests, this episode involves the famous reporter, Perry White, who currently is a failed reporter languishing in misery and alcohol. He's arrived in Smallville the same time a solar flare is occurring, which is causing Clark's powers to act up. This episode is where Clark and his parents piece together that his powers are somehow connected to the sun. I love the subtle bits of lore building. So because of this, Clark ends up using his powers in front of Perry. A drunk Perry. However, Perry is now suspicious. And when a reporter like Perry White sees a possible story, it's not going to be easy to get him to stop investigating. Quick question. Would y'all agree that Perry White is one of the most well-known tertiary supporting characters? He's not super relevant usually since he's mostly in the background as the Daily Planet editor-in-chief, but he is synonymous with the world of Superman. It's just something I was thinking of because this episode follows Perry's story almost more than Clark's, and to make a character the titular character of the episode and have them be so prominently featured in the episode, it says something about his significance. Perry not only interrogates Clark, but Lana as well, looking to get a scoop about the girl whose parents died in a meteor shower for this weird tabloid he's currently working for. He also comes across Chloe's work as he's investigating Clark and talks about the dangers of going after Lionel, something that Chloe is currently dealing with and has no clue how to get out of. It was this nice coincidental mentor-mentee moment that I really liked. Anyway, Perry attempts to get Clark to reveal his powers by jumping off a ledge, but Clark dives after him, grabbing a rope in the process. The two are hanging, and with Clark's powers acting up, he actually legitimately can't save himself or Perry. What would have happened if Clark fell? Would he have died if his powers weren't working? At least maybe until they kicked in? But Lana and Pete rescue them both, and Perry sees Clark's hands torn apart and bleeding by the rope, realizing his mistake. Yes, Perry, harassing a teenager and then putting them in serious danger is bad. I'm so glad you learned this lesson. Lex's story for this episode is refusing to take therapy seriously. He was required to take 5 sessions and basically screwed around in all 5 because he didn't actually believe in doing therapy, which, alright, guess he wasn't sincere last episode. But the doctor recommends more sessions because she feels there is a lot Lex does need to work through. Remember, kids, therapy isn't bad. Don't be a Lex. At one point, Lex snaps at Perry and shoves him against the wall, threatening him if he doesn't leave him and his friends alone. Lex is shaking after this, and you can see on his face that he's shocked and concerned with his behavior. Ultimately, he decides to start therapy seriously. Good for you, Lex. As Clark sees Perry off to take a bus to Metropolis, Perry says something to Clark that I have to talk about. He says,
"You try to help people, even fools like me, and you never ask for anything in return."
This is the essence of Superman. He looks for the best in people, he gives selflessly, he shows deep empathy to even the most troubled individuals, and he strives to do what's right without wanting anything. This is why he's a symbol of hope. And I love Smallville for all these character interactions with Clark and how he makes their lives better. Even when it's a side quest, like the previous episode, that girl, Sarah, I didn't name her earlier because it didn't matter, but she was in trouble and Clark did what he believed was right. He helped her, and her life literally was better off. But also, Lana says that she met Sarah, and all Sarah talked about was Clark. He makes such a huge positive impact on people. This episode is a perfect example too, because Perry harassed Clark and the people he cares about, attempted to expose his secret, and put his life in danger. Yet, Clark simply saw a man who was bitter, lost, and misguided, driven by anger and frustration. And so, he helped Perry as best as he could. I love the show for this reason, because pretty much every episode, Clark is helping someone and making an impact on their life for the better. Oh, one last thing. Perry tells Clark that he looked at some of his articles in the Torch and sees a glimmer of hope. Could this be the start of Clark's journalism pursuits? I mean, he's already been doing it for a bit now. He works at the Torch. He may not be writing any serious articles, but he and Chloe are constantly investigating every unusual event or suspicious character. He's been on the journey already, but we're still a bit away from him actually taking journalism seriously as a path. Regardless, such a good episode this was. Sorry, I don't know why I decided to speak like Yoda. Wait, let me do the voice to really sell this. Such a good episode this was. Okay, let's get on to episode 6, Relic. Now this episode is quite interesting as we get some insight into Jor-El, who apparently visited Earth, specifically Smallville, 40 years ago and suspiciously looks exactly like Clark. And Lana's great aunt, Louise, of course her name starts with an L, looks just like Lana. I actually love this trope of characters' family members being played by the same actors. It isn't actually implausible that they would look similar, so I'm cool with it. So Lana's great uncle is in jail because he was convicted of murdering Louise, but he blames the drifter, Jor-El, who is on a vacation to Smallville. Okay, it's not a vacation, but he says that his father sent him here to learn a lesson. We see the story play out through flashbacks Clark is having about Jor-El. He and Louise fell in love, but Louise was married, so they had a secret affair. Jor-El, or Joe as he goes by, his nom de guerre, even reveals his powers to Louise, carrying her while he flies. He's flying! Clark, come on, dude! Figure it out already! So Clark and Lana are investigating Louise's murder, which is really cool to see since he literally met Perry White last episode. It feels like a nice follow-up on that. The episode itself isn't that special, but it does give Clark a new perspective on Jor-El and shows him that they aren't all that different. Jor-El was rebelling against his father too, and Jor-El fell in love with Lana's great aunt, so it could seem like Clark and Lana are star-crossed lovers. Okay, pause. This had to be before Jor-El married or at least ended up with Lara, right? He's probably in his mid-20s here. Or maybe they track age differently on Krypton, but in Earth years, he seems to be mid-20s. He's not cheating on Lara, is he? Jor-El meets a man named Hiram Kent, that is, Jonathan's father. Hiram helps Jor-El leave Smallville after Louise's death. Clark suspects that Jonathan and Martha didn't find Clark by accident, but that they were chosen. Okay, pause. I'm not sure how I feel about this. On one hand, it makes so much sense that if you were Jor-El and you were sending your infant son across the cosmos, you would send him to somewhere that you have some knowledge about and someone who you think would be good to take care of him. So it is logical that the Kents were chosen to find Clark. Why leave that up to chance? But on the other hand, I feel it kind of distorts a key component of the story, which is that Clark happened to be found by these two earnest, wholesome, humble, down-to-earth farmers who raised this boy into a man with immense empathy and care for people, because if he were found by anyone else, the world would be so different. And the idea that finding him was pure chance, nothing planned or intended, I feel it matters to Clark's story. So I don't hate this idea that they were chosen because, again, yeah, why wouldn't you choose decent people to take care of him? But I feel it takes a bit away from the conversation of nature versus nurture, something that is explored in the show as Clark constantly questions what type of people he comes from. What do y'all think? Does one make more sense than the other? So in the end, it's revealed to be the former sheriff who is now the mayor, whom Clark gets to confess by pretending to be a ghost of Joe. I'm not sure I've said this before, but Clark is really smart. He often comes up with creative ways to handle situations. I say this because Superman gets a reputation for just being strong and punching things when Clark literally has basically a supercomputer brain. And so many times throughout the show, we see him be really clever in how he handles the villain of the week or some other opposing force. He deserves more credit for his intelligence and quick thinking. The other important note is that Lex's grandfather, Lachlan, of course, an L, was arrested for petty crime in Smallville, even though he was told his family was never here before. Looking into things more, he learns his grandparents died in a tenement fire in Suicide Slum, an established neighborhood in DC lore that's located in Metropolis. Well, that's what Lionel tells him. But later, he finds out from a detective that there was an explosion. He tells Lionel that his parents were murdered, and my goodness, Lionel's acting is so good, I hate it. I'm not just talking about John Glover's acting of Lionel, but the character's feigned pain and frustration at hearing the news. Now, Lex intends to find out who killed his grandparents. It's a fun episode which does give us insight into our main characters' family histories, and it's way more interesting than the next episode, episode 7, Magnetic. So Magnetic is about a guy who likes Lana and then gets the power of telepathy/magnetism, which apparently allows him to control or influence people as well. He really only uses it to get Lana to like him, make out with him, and run away with him, which is all so uncomfortable and creepy. She also lashes out at Clark a few times, assuming jealousy. It's quite similar to the episode with Ian, the guy who could split into two, but this time Lana is actually being influenced. However, it still highlights the underlying tension and the growing rift between Clark and Lana. The other important story of the episode is that Chloe starts to find out just how deep in the trenches she is when it comes to Lionel and how dangerous it is. The police detective Lex spoke to in the previous episode takes Chloe's computer, and shortly after, Lex shows Chloe that he is dead. Chloe finally confides that she's been investigating Lionel to find damning evidence to blackmail him to get out from under his control. Lex promises to protect Chloe as they work together. Chloe reveals that Morgan Edge was Lionel's closest childhood friend. This started a unique alliance between Lex and Chloe that I really enjoyed. I like that Chloe is diving into a big story that has nothing to do with Clark. I like that she's being the investigative reporter for something beyond kryptonite-infected people. And I like that she has a real opposition to her, a major force that could crush her at any moment and is desperately seeking a way out from under Lionel's control. It raises the stakes of her investigative nature to a much higher level. Other than that, this episode was just there. It's probably my least favorite episode of the season. Fortunately, that's not the case with the episode that comes next, episode 8, Shattered. This episode is something else, honestly. I don't even have the words to describe the uneasy feeling it puts in my gut, but in the best way possible. It's a thriller of an episode that's intense and emotional, so let's get into it. Morgan Edge, who we now find out is still alive, changes his voice and his face, and he's carrying around a kryptonite beaded necklace. He's found by Lex, who threatens to call the police and inform his father that Edge is still alive unless Edge gives Lex hard evidence to take down Lionel for the murder of Lex's grandparents. There's this moment when Lex is talking to Edge where he grabs his neck and seems in pain or some sort of distress. It's important to know. Edge does admit to the crime and Lionel's involvement on camera, which Lex reviews back at the mansion. Someone then breaks in and attempts to kill Lex, killing his security guard Darius in the process. Lex jumps through the window and escapes. Clark finds Lex hiding in his barn, and Lex explains what happened. But when Clark visits the mansion to get the evidence from Lex's safe, he finds nothing in it and sees that the mansion is intact. The bodyguard on duty tells Clark that Darius had the night off. Clark x-rays the area to find a piece of the broken window behind a pillar in the hallway. Something is really off here. I want to quickly say that the music in this episode really emphasizes the uneasy feeling and the mystery of the whole situation. Great job by the sound department. Lionel shows up at the farm after Clark gets Chloe to stay at the farm for safety since she has been working with Lex to take down Lionel. Lionel claims Lex has had a psychotic break. But how would he even know that? Clark is unsure about all this, but then he finds Lex singing a lullaby and tells Clark he had to get the baby. In his hands, though, is a rolled up blanket who Lex thinks is his little brother, Julian. Clark is concerned and conflicted, but ultimately tells his parents about Lex hiding in the barn. When Clark tells his parents about Morgan Edge being alive and having plastic surgery, they question if this is just a part of Lex's delusions and illness. Lex overheard some of their conversation and decides to leave to prove he's right. He asks Clark to choose a side, and Clark goes off with him. I do appreciate this moment, and it's clear how much Clark cares for Lex and how much he values their friendship that he would trust Lex this much. They go to find Morgan Edge, but the place where Lex found Edge is now a sweatshop. Lex grabs his neck again, perhaps Out of stress, they head back to the mansion to find more evidence, but instead find Darius alive? This can't be right. We all saw him get killed, right? But in comes his psychiatrist, almost like she was there on call, telling Lex he needs help. She suggests giving him a sedative, but Lex, understandably, believes it's some sort of drug causing his condition. Lex pulls a gun on Darius and the psychiatrist, and Clark is now completely unsure what to do. He ultimately hides Lex away in the stables. He gets Lana to bring them food and watch over Lex while he goes out to find the truth. Clark meets Chloe to give her the sedative that Dr. Foster wanted to give Lex to test it for any sort of harmful drug. Chloe informs Clark that she looked into Lex's files and found out that he's exhibited this type of behavior before, specifically singing a lullaby to a rolled up blanket, thinking it's Julian. Back at the stables, Lana gives Lex some tea, but Lex assumes it's laced with something, that Lana is in on the plot to make him seem insane. He rages out and throws Lana into one of the horse stables, causing the horse to freak out. When Lana attempts to crawl away, the horse tramples her, leaving her leg mangled. I can't explain why, but this scene is so hard to watch. It's not even graphic, nor does it involve some excruciating expression of pain from Lana. In fact, she gets knocked out pretty much immediately. But maybe that's why it is so uncomfortable to see. Clark is overseeing Lana in her hospital bed when Lionel attempts to put all the blame for what happened on Clark because he fed into Lex's delusions. I still don't buy it. Lionel is a liar and nothing can change my mind. Chloe shows up as Lionel leaves and lets Clark know that it was a common sedative. Oh, okay. Maybe I was wrong. Just like Clark. Except Chloe suggests that there are many ways they could have dosed Lex, and Clark speculates that it happened at the mansion since that's where everything is brought to Lex. Clark goes to the mansion and accuses Darius of drugging Lex. He denies it, but then Clark slams him to the ground and threatens to break his arm. Good on you, Clark. He gets Darius to admit that they drugged Lex via the scotch. Clark gets Darius to call the people who he was working for to meet him at the stables and bring money. I do love when Clark takes more initiative and is a bit more assertive, some might say aggressive, when fighting for his loved ones. It's a bit of a different side to him that we don't normally see, and sometimes you just want him to do more. I'm not saying he's got to cause serious harm or cross any lines, but he can be a bit blasé in his approach, more on the defense instead of the offense. So it's a nice change of pace. Lex ambushes Lionel's guard at Luthor Corp and confronts his father, threatening him with a gun. I'll be honest, I kind of wish Lex shot Lionel here. Maybe in the leg or something. It doesn't have to be fatal, but even if it was, would that be such a bad thing? Oh, how much trouble Lex would have saved himself if he did it. Anyway, Lex seeks the truth, but Lionel continues to deny. Lex then starts to hear Julian crying, and Lionel mentions something about how he knows it was an accident. Wait, what was an accident? But before we get more info on that, Lex demands to know where Edge is, and Lionel gives him the information. At the stables, a man with a gun is waiting, but Clark gets the hired gun in a chokehold and gets the info on where to find the person in charge of all this, which leads us to Morgan Edge's new place. Lex gets Edge at gunpoint, and Edge confesses that it was Lionel's idea to make Lex look crazy while Edge just wanted to kill him. Edge also points out that the neck pains, the muscle aches, and sleeplessness are common side effects of the drug. So there we have it. Lex was being drugged, and this was all a ploy cooked up by Lionel. Before Lex kills Edge, Clark shows up and stops him. But Edge is still carrying that necklace made of kryptonite, and Edge starts beating the life out of Clark. But Lex shoots Edge. Lex then points the gun at Clark, thinking he's part of the whole plot. Before he can kill Clark, Lex hears Edge attempting to drive away and escape. He gets in front of the car and starts firing at it, hitting Edge and killing him. This time for realsies. The car is about to hit Lex, but before it does, Clark speeds in, pushes Lex out of the way, and absorbs the car hit. Then he pushes the car away, and Lex sees all of it. But Clark speeds off as Dr. Foster and company arrive. He tries to tell him what he saw, but they ignore it. Clark is at the hospital at Lana's bedside when she wakes up. She tells Clark that he was right, that being around him is too dangerous because Lana almost died. And she tells Clark she needs to stay away from him, which really has to sting. Before, it was emotional distress Clark was causing her, but now it's physical, putting her life in danger. We go to Belle Reve, where Lionel checks in on Dr. Foster about Lex, and she lets him know that she can control his meds better now, and that he won't have any short-term memory left after this treatment is complete. Lionel goes to see Lex, and this scene is brutal. Lex is in a padded room with one-way glass, in a straitjacket, glassy-eyed look, and a completely lost expression on his face as Johnny Cash's Hurt plays. Lionel watches Lex as Lex just stares into the distance, seeming to be barely present. What an episode! It was thrilling, it was uncomfortable, it was anxiety-inducing. I mean, I started to think I was losing my mind at some points. The plot to drive Lex mad and make him lose all credibility was dastardly brilliant by Lionel. And Clark being conflicted with deciding how to best help his friend made me really feel how strong the bond is between them. I do love when Clark walks off with Lex because it shows how much these two do care about each other, regardless of the secrets and lies between them. Without much hesitation, Clark was convinced that something nefarious must be going on because of how well he knows Lex and trusts him overall. Lex's deterioration into madness was difficult to watch but exciting to see play out. And Lex knows Clark's secret now. What? What happens? And I can't forget what happened with Lana. Again, such a painful scene. Equally as painful was her scathing words to Clark. How do these two even move forward in some amicable way? Do they ever reconcile? Also, I know I'm going to sound like a broken record, but Lionel is pure evil. Pure evil. This episode solidified it. And spoiler, the creators do aim to redeem Lionel in later seasons, which I'll get into more when we get there. But after watching this, I don't think he's deserving of redemption. And honestly, I don't think he's redeemed at all by his end in the show. Even as a force for good, he still does underhanded things and keeps secrets and has his own agenda. That is not a good person, and it doesn't make up for all the harm he has done to Clark, his family and friends, the town of Smallville, and especially to his own son, Lex. Oh, and I said this already, but it bears repeating. Ending the episode with that unforgettable visual of Lex in a straitjacket in a padded room, just lost in a totally dazed state. Also, Clark looking on from outside Lana's hospital room, heartbroken over what happened with Johnny Cash's Hurt playing was chef's kiss. This is my favorite episode of the season and one of Smallville's absolute best in the series. So, how do we follow up such an impactful and emotional episode? With another intense episode, episode 9, Asylum. We start the episode with Lex and Belle Reve being given his meds, but when he goes to paint, he coughs, secretly getting rid of the pills, tossing them into paint. Clark comes to see Lex, and as he walks through the facility to go see him, he comes across Van McNulty, the bigot targeting kryptonite-infected people, Eric Summers, the kid who got Clark's powers when they were struck by lightning, and Ian Randall, the multiplier guy. Clark tells Lex he's been waiting to see him for a month but couldn't, so we've had a time jump. Lex tells Clark he knows his secret but promises not to tell anyone. Okay, pause. I am firmly on the train that Clark should not have told Lex his secret. But there are plenty of people, including one of my dear friends who watches these videos, who believes Clark should have, specifically in this season, that this was the perfect opportunity. And this moment is an argument for it. Lex being willing to protect his secret, to be a trusted confidant, maybe there's some validity to the idea that Clark should have told his secret to Lex. I don't know for sure, but I can see people's arguments why. However, Lex wants Clark to break him out. Clark refuses. So Lex attempts to escape, and he gets all the way to the barbed wire fence, but gets tased, which was tough to see. He's then put in a full body restraint. We catch up with Lana in the hospital, who is now in physical therapy and slowly learning to walk again. A fellow patient antagonizes her, Adam Knight, who smugly tells her she should push herself more, but someone like her probably isn't used to struggling. Boy, just wait until you hear about the kind of life she's had. Why so obnoxious, dude? I'll say this right now. I'm not a fan of Adam and never become a fan of him. I don't hate him, but his character is not really interesting. They attempt to make him interesting with some mystery, but it doesn't work in my opinion. Also, new man in Lana's life alert. At the farm, Martha encourages Clark to go visit Lana, whom he hasn't seen this entire time in the hospital apparently. I knew the relationship was in a bad place, but this is not good. A whole month? Damn, dude. Clark says he's just doing what Lana asked, which, okay, fair. Ian and Eric have a meeting with Ku Klux Van, as Ian calls him, which is so clever and so damn funny. And the three plot to work together to get revenge on Clark. Lionel meets with Dr. Foster and complains that her drug therapy isn't working, that Lex's memory is still intact. He insists on some radical procedure, which we find out in the next scene via Clark is electroshock therapy. So Lionel wants to fry Lex's brain. Yeah, Dad of the year over here. Van is working out when he gets a package delivered by an orderly who he bribed to get kryptonite. Van informs Ian, and then Ian decides that John Tucker must die. Yes, I made that joke already in Van's first appearance, but he actually dies here, so it feels more applicable. Clark convinces Dr. Foster to stop the procedure, and Pete questions if that's a good idea since Lex knows Clark's secret. Pete then talks about how difficult it is to keep his secret and that it may not be the best idea to have Lex know. Clark is shocked to hear how much of a burden it is, but Pete points out that he has Clark's back, whereas Lex won't. Just then, Chloe comes in to let Clark know that Dr. Foster was found dead in a car accident. Lionel really will stop at nothing, huh? I mean, I get it, I guess, because he killed his parents, so he might as well go to extreme lengths to keep himself out of jail. But my goodness, man, how many bodies have you left in your wake for anything you've pursued? Lionel's probably got more skeletons in his closet than we can count. Anyway, with no other options left and Lex's procedure imminent, Clark decides to break Lex out. But he's ambushed by Ian and Eric. Eric uses the kryptonite and a high voltage shock to take Clark's powers. Meanwhile, Lex is forced to undergo the procedure. It's a race against the clock now as the power to the building gets knocked out when Eric took Clark's powers. Clark still has a chance to save Lex. He really quickly gets his powers back and takes out both Ian and Eric, but he can't get there in time. He arrives just as the procedure is completed. I do not care if Lionel is even being earnest about his concern for Lex. He's just a despicable human being, and everything he says is fake and ill-intentioned. Lana is finally discharged from the hospital after she pushes herself more thanks to Adam. Adam tells Lana he likes her, but Lana says she's not ready for a relationship, so they decide to be friends. Whatever. Lionel gets footage of Belle Reve when Lex says to Clark that he knows his secret, but now it's too late because Lex's memories have been erased. I guess some good came out of it. Clark goes to the talent for Lana's welcome back party, and they make eye contact, but don't go near each other or speak at all. The discomfort, awkwardness, and lack of trust is really evident. Like I said, a great episode with a lot of tension. From Lex knowing Clark's secret, to Clark's efforts to stop the procedure, to Clark getting his powers taken, a lot of uncertainty was present about what would happen. I do think Clark losing his powers for maybe a minute total was a bit of a letdown, but the need to get his powers back in time to hopefully save Lex made up for it because that was the real story. Now that Lionel has erased Lex's memory of his crimes, will we ever see him brought to justice? We'll have to wait and find out. Next up, we have a personal favorite of mine, episode 10, Whisper. And the reason this episode is a personal favorite of mine is because Clark gets a new power, super hearing. I'll be honest, I enjoy this episode because of the introduction to super hearing, but overall, it's not that special of an episode. Clark goes blind when attempting to stop a robbery at a jewelry store, and when he fires his heat vision, the blast hits a kryptonite jewel flying through the air, which reflects back and hits Clark in the eyes. His lack of sight activates his hearing, and the way they highlight what Clark experiences is really cool. He's in school, and they amplify all the sounds, like locker doors closing, or the tumblers on the lock clicking, footsteps, and backpacks zipping up. Super hearing can seem like a meaningless power to many, but it can be incredibly useful. More importantly, it's probably the most burdensome power Superman has. It gets explored later in the show, but Clark hears pretty much everything all at once. That means he hears the pleas and cries of thousands, if not millions of people, and he has to find a way to focus on the ones most important in the moment. Also, when he's just living his day-to-day, he's gotta tune it all out. This is a heavy responsibility to carry that could easily turn into guilt and swallow anyone whole, because how could you possibly help everyone? You can't. But not Clark. He finds a way to focus while also helping as many people as he can and still remains hopeful. That is the beauty of Superman. Clark also hears a phone call between Chloe and Lionel and finds out that Chloe was working with Lionel. He later confronts her about it, leading to renewed tension between the two. As for Chloe, her situation gets worse as Lionel gets her fired from the Daily Planet and has her dad fired from the Smallville plant. This all happened because in that same conversation between Lionel and Chloe, Lionel talked about Lex just being given a position at Luthor Corp to seem like he's relevant. Clark told Lex, and Lex told Lionel. Lionel obviously denied the truth and then punished Chloe since he thought she shared their conversation with Lex. Clark uses his hearing to save Pete, who has been threatened because, honestly, I don't care to explain it because it doesn't really matter, much like Pete. What does matter is that once again, Clark's parents are there to guide him and help him through understanding how to control this new ability. It's more wholesome, loving parenting that is a direct juxtaposition of Lionel's parenting of Lex, which is demeaning, manipulative, and dishonest. Clark and Lana have a lot of distance and tension this episode, but they also have some open and honest conversations about what they feel and where they stand with each other. Lana even tells Clark she met someone and there may be something between this new guy and her. I like that the two are putting in the effort to find a way to work through their issues and remain friends. The last thing of note about this episode is that as Clark slowly starts to regain his vision, he begins wearing glasses. Wait, Clark Kent with glasses? I don't know how I feel about that. He looks like a totally different person. A fun episode, but nothing major going on here. So let's move on to the next episode, episode 11. I feel the same way about this episode. Someone is brainwashing people through a hypnotic message sent via email to kill Chloe. First, Clark attempts to run her over with his car. Then, Lana straight up starts fighting her in school, even using an axe. We find out it's a patient of Dr. Garner's, Molly, a tech genius who created this software that lets her mind control people. I don't know what use anyone would have for that they'd think to make it in the first place. We do learn a bit more about Adam, like he knows martial arts and how to hack really well, and he chalks it up to random skills. Okay, buddy. He also gets upset at Lana for the Clark baggage, but carries his own and acts out because of it. Total hypocrite. I do not care for this man. They gotta stop putting damaged guys in front of Lana. I think she connects with them due to a shared experience of emotional trauma, but it never works out because of this either. Anyway, Molly is doing what she is to protect Garner because she feels he helped her, and Chloe is trying to expose Garner. Clark saves Chloe from his parents who have been put under hypnotic suggestion, but Chloe also saves Clark as Jonathan uses kryptonite and starts beating Clark up until Chloe drops bales of hay on him. Lana and Adam had a bit of drama because Lana wanted to know how Adam could know and do the things he did, and Adam turned it around on her, making it about being hurt by Clark, so she's not trusting enough. Adam was going to stay in Smallville until this confrontation. They reconcile and Lana offers Adam a place to stay in the room above the Talon. So it looks like he's here for a while. Fun. Chloe and Clark have an honest talk about the mistrust and betrayal and reconcile. While they have been friends for some time now, I feel like this is the true start of their friendship where they can rely on one another. Their friendship is one of my favorite things about the entire series. Lex visits Dr. Garner to get his help recovering his memories. See, Lex can't let things go. Don't get me wrong, he shouldn't let this go, but it just proves my point that his obsession with things dominates his better judgment, and his approach to get what he wants is usually underhanded and dangerous, with seriously harmful consequences. One last important piece of information we learn is that Chloe has a cousin named Lois Lane. Yes, that Lois Lane. Chloe is using Lois's name as her pseudonym for one last article after she got fired from the Daily Planet. She even makes a cheeky comment about how Lois isn't into journalism at all, so it's fine. While I think this episode is just okay, what I do like is Chloe's investigative nature and its consequences being the focus. I wish we got more of this from the beginning. Her journalistic instinct getting her into all these difficult situations that she and her friends then have to figure out. But let's continue with episode 12, Hereafter. This is a so-so episode about a new student at Smallville High, Jordan, who can see people's deaths when they touch him. Jordan reveals his secret to Clark pretty early on, and they kind of work as a crime-fighting duo to figure out how to stop the visions of Lana and another classmate, Megan. Jordan also sees a vision of Clark, and it's just a Superman cape. Whoa! It's awesome. The main significance of this episode is that Adam gets caught injecting himself with a needle by Chloe, and now her and Lana are suspicious of what's going on. Lana confronts Adam, and he just flips out about trust and whatever. Adam also displays a superhuman-like ability to play the piano, even though he has no record of ever playing an instrument. Lex is now investigating Adam, and we don't know exactly what he knows yet, but he tells Lana that Adam is part of a clinical medical trial testing a new drug. A lot of this isn't adding up, and the maths even less when Jordan tells Lana that he thinks Adam died some time ago. Jordan had accidentally touched Adam, so this is how he gathered this information, though Lana doesn't know that. And that's all there really is to this episode, except that this episode, which appears to be a filler episode, ends with Clark finding Jonathan unconscious in the barn. They do a whole thing where Clark drops a plate of cookies and it falls and crashes in slow-mo, so you know it's serious. Is this it? Is Jonathan Kent about to die? We'll have to see what happens in the next episode, episode 13, Velocity. Now, if you've been thinking, why hasn't Nuv been mentioning Pete much this season? It's because not only is Pete barely relevant in the scenes he's in, he's hardly in any scenes this entire season. But for the maybe dozen or so Pete fans that exist, here's an episode for you. Before we get to his super important storyline, let's check in with Jonathan Kent, the man who was found unconscious to end the previous episode. He's in the hospital now, and we find out he's had a heart attack. Clark is feeling really guilty because he believes Jonathan getting powers to bring Clark home is the cause of this. But who cares about Jonathan's health? We gotta focus on Pete being this amazing street racer, apparently. Clark finds out about this because he and his mom are driving home and almost gets hit by some cars going super fast. He chases them down and finds out one of the drivers is Pete. Pete explains that this is the one thing he's good at, and in a world where he's constantly in Clark's shadow, he wanted to feel special for once. Okay, pause. Listen, I get wanting to feel important, feel good about yourself, and I get Pete is a teenager, but this is some of the pettiest nonsense I've heard from a character in the show. Yeah, it must be tough being Superman's best friend, but there are many other things you could pursue to carve out an identity for yourself. I also feel like the writers just don't care about Pete, so they put him in these meaningless stories. Chloe is investigating Lionel. Lana has a mysterious man who came back to life living in the room above her coffee shop. Lex is working to recover his lost memories, and Pete is racing cars. One of these does not belong. So I just realized I mentioned that Adam came back to life. Yeah, we find out this episode that he was someone else and died of a rare liver disease. Adam is his new identity. Also, he turns dangerous and antagonistic really quickly. There was no progression to it. He just got mad at Lana once she asked for the truth about him and then became extremely hostile. It's made clear though that Adam is suffering from something. His eyes start to bleed and he has lesions on his skin. But then he injects himself with something again and he's okay. He does threaten Lana when she comes to check on him, so yeah, he's not a good dude. Why am I not surprised? Lex basically blackmails this molecular biologist that's working with Adam and gets her to work for him. It's relevant for future parts of the story. The main plot with Pete is forgettable, other than the fact that the antagonist is the same actor, Ryan Merriman, who starred in the Disney Channel original movie, Luck of the Irish. But yeah, I think they could have done more with Pete here. They could have given him a much more significant reason to be upset with Clark, which he is in this episode, but just because Clark keeps getting in his way, for Pete's own benefit, mind you, he gets mad at Clark because Clark tries to rat out the street racer, but it doesn't work because he has a cop in his pocket. So the guy beats up Pete as a lesson, and Pete owes him 20 grand for not throwing a race. You see what I mean when I say this story is pointless? Don't get me wrong, the arguments Pete and Clark have are actually pretty interesting because they stem from this insecurity and jealousy Pete has, which they could have explored more both in this episode and the season as a whole. But Pete street racing and being upset that Clark is looking out for him is so pathetic, honestly. It's funny, even an episode dedicated to Pete does not have me talking about him much. I really think Pete should have been more antagonistic in this season to Clark. Let the weight of carrying the secret really get to him. Maybe even have him turn on Clark for a portion of the season. You don't have to have him expose Clark's secret, but the threat of him doing so could be interesting. It could have culminated in this episode where the fights would make sense with all the background established. I think Pete knowing Clark's secret is really wasted while he's around. He occasionally helps out and sometimes covers for Clark, but we don't even see him do it often. He briefly mentioned the difficulty in keeping Clark's secret when Clark was helping Lex, but that's really it. This episode and Pete's character here as a whole is such wasted potential. So, enough about this boring story. Let's talk about something more interesting with the next episode, episode 14, Obsession. This is a pretty interesting episode as Clark's secret gets exposed again. This time it's to a fellow student, Alicia, when Clark and her get trapped in an elevator on a field trip at Luthor Corp. He punches a hole through the metal and stops the elevator with his bare hand. Before they get rescued and he gets found out, Alicia grabs him and teleports them to safety. This starts a budding romance between the two, as Clark feels Alicia is someone Clark can actually be open and honest with. The problem, however, is that Alicia gets obsessed, as the title suggests, way too quickly. After their first date, Alicia teleports into Clark's bed while he's sleeping. They then get caught by his parents. She also fills Clark's locker room with sexy photos of herself as Lex, and only Lex described it, which, gross. That's a teenage girl, Lex. She redecorates Clark's loft and scratches out Lana's photo in Clark's yearbook. Yeah, this girl has definitely lost it. There is even a point where Clark stops at Alicia's house to talk to her, but instead has a chat with her parents. They tell Clark to play along with her and be in the relationship, and that things did not end well for a boy that Alicia used to like. Yikes. Clark, get out of there now. That's not even the worst of it though. Alicia attacks her own father, putting him in the hospital because she believes he wanted to get in the way of Alicia and Clark's relationship. Clark tells her there is no us. Alicia doesn't take this well. Instead of listening to sad music and crying her eyes out or having a girls' night out with her friends, Alicia aims to kill Lana because she thinks that Clark can't move on as long as Lana is in the picture, as in alive. Okay, pause. This is what I mean by how bad Lana has it. In this episode, she is not even remotely involved with Clark's life at the moment. She's minding her own business, actually dealing with another creeper, Adam, who Lana found out is spying on her and Clark and keeping a journal of it. She's focused on getting this man out of her apartment when Alicia comes after her. Alicia approaches her outside the Talon and starts monologuing about how she doesn't understand what is so special about Lana, and Lana is just confused, wondering what Alicia is talking about. She gets sucked into all this nonsense simply because she had a brief dalliance with Clark. Why can't people just leave her alone? Anyway, Clark gets subdued by Alicia with kryptonite, which she found out was his weakness when she spied on him talking to his parents, but is eventually able to escape and saves Lana just in time, hitting Alicia with lead paint, lead being her weakness that prevents her from teleporting. Adam has left the apartment without a trace, and Lana thanks Lex, but Lex tells her he had nothing to do with it. So, who did? Where is Adam? He's shown strapped to a chair in a random room being visited by Lionel, of course. Lionel explains to Adam why he sent him to Smallville, to become Lana's best friend, to find out everything she knows about Clark Kent. Okay, pause. So this is Adam's whole purpose? This is why his character exists? To get intel on Clark? This is why he was in rehab in the first place? This is a terrible plan. Why does Lionel assume Lana knows anything about Clark? There are better ways to infiltrate Clark's inner circle or gain Clark's confidence to uncover his secrets. This is a poorly thought out idea. Anyway, Dr. Tang, the same doctor Lex had coerced to work with him, comes to give Adam his medication, but Lionel won't let her, leaving Adam trapped in the chair in the dark. This is a fun Fatal Attraction-esque story, which actually Chloe references in this episode.
I'm really sorry she went all Glenn Close on you.
Seeing this bond form between Clark and Alicia, where Clark actually feels he found someone he could open up to and have a relationship with, was sweet. The fact that it quickly spiraled into disaster as Alicia's immediate and intense attachment leads to people getting hurt and Lana almost losing her life? Not so sweet. Clark expresses his concerns with his mom of possibly not finding someone. He thought it could be Lana, but he can't be honest with her. And he thought it could be Alicia, but she's mental. And while he doesn't say this, he also probably thought it could have been Kyla, but she died. My man just wants to be loved. You gotta feel for him. As for the Addams storyline, the pieces are slowly coming together and we get a bit more insight into that whole situation in the next episode, episode 15, Resurrection. So the Kents are at the hospital for Jonathan's checkup. While Clark is waiting for that to finish, he speaks with a classmate, Garrett, whose brother, Vince, is in the hospital with some liver disease, which is curious because Adam also has a liver disease. Vince ends up dying and his body is flown somewhere else unbeknownst to anyone. He's injected with something by Dr. Tang and comes back to life. He later shows up in Clark's barn alive again, confusing Garrett and Clark. While Garrett is just relieved his brother is alive, Clark is concerned and suspicious. Then Vince's eyes start bleeding, just like we've seen happen with Adam. Clark does some investigating and finds out that Vince was taken to Metron Pharmaceuticals, a lab that Chloe and Lex are also investigating. Lex is chatting with Dr. Tang and threatens to get her deported, while Clark swipes a vial of a drug for the disease. Garrett has no patience, however, and straps himself with a bomb and threatens to blow the place up unless Vince gets a new liver. All this is going on while Jonathan is literally in the middle of getting triple bypass surgery. Clark gets into the hospital and tries to help Garrett by giving him the serum, which reacts funny when it gets near the bomb on Garrett's chest that is laced with kryptonite because his family is in demolition and they use it for explosives. Also, wait! Is that serum made of Clark's blood? There's a sniper on the roof that shoots Garrett, so Clark super speeds to grab a blanket and grab the bomb and gets rid of the bomb in a really amazing scene. Dr. Tang is now working with Lex to get help to escape Lionel's control and reveals to Lex that she's kept Adam alive even though Lionel said to stop treating him. Apparently, the platelets that make up this wonder drug are in short supply. Seemingly superhuman platelets that heal people and bring them back to life? Yeah, that's gotta be Clark's blood. What's interesting is that at the end of the episode, Clark explores the idea of revealing his secret if his blood can be used to save lives. His parents don't agree and talk him out of it, but I appreciate Clark considering it. Honestly, an okay but mostly forgettable episode in my opinion, though it had its moments and we get more understanding of the whole Adam plot of the season. And that plot concludes, for the most part at least, in the next episode, episode 16, Crisis. So Clark joins Pete volunteering at a teen crisis hotline when Clark gets a call at the hotline from Lana. It's full of static, but she's pleading for his help, saying someone has a gun. She's shown running and being chased until she gets shot and killed. Clark runs over to the Talon, but he finds Lana alive, studying for a test. Okay, pause. If you saw my season 1 video, which if you haven't, go watch it, you might recall a small rant over something known as the how we got here trope, where a scene is shown and then a time jump earlier happens to show us how the story reached to that point. I am not a fan of this trope, except for this instance, because we find out that the call came from the future, and the call plays into the story itself with the characters working to prevent what happens during that call. In other instances, the trope is done to grab the audience's attention, but like I said during that rant, it feels unnecessary and a waste of screen time. In this instance, however, Clark and his friends are working to solve the mystery of the call. What's fascinating to me is that the hotline has a recording of the call, so it's not something that can just be ignored or denied. The sheriff even plays it in front of Lana to show her what the sheriff presumes is a prank call. Lex confronts Lionel about the serum, and Lionel, as usual, denies it. But he then has Dr. Tang's lab packed up and moved. Dr. Tang goes to let Adam know and that she can't take him with her. I don't think this ends well for our Dr. Tang. Clark confronts Lex about Adam after Clark figured out Adam was the one chasing Lana on the call using his super hearing. Clark wants Lex's help to stop Adam, so they go visit the lab and find everyone, including Dr. Tang, dead. Yeah, guess I was right. While Lana is brought to the Kent farm to protect her from Adam, Clark and Lex get held up at the mansion being questioned by the cops about the murders at Metron Lab. The tension is real. Adam eventually gets Lana after kidnapping Chloe, using her as bait, and beating up Jonathan Kent. He even takes Jonathan's shotgun. Lana takes him to some storage facility to get his belongings where he has more medicine stored. Except it's gone. Lana fights him and runs, and Adam gives chase. The call happens just like we saw, but this time, Clark makes it in time to stop the bullet and save Lana. Adam warns Clark that Lionel is investigating and pursuing Clark and that he won't stop just before Adam dies. Again, if Lionel's whole reason for sending Adam to Smallville was Clark, shouldn't he have insisted that Adam befriend Clark and spend as much time with him as possible? Adam and Clark barely had any interaction. It feels like a real waste of a character, and again, bad execution of a plan by Lionel. That's pretty much how I feel about this whole Adam story for this season. Nothing really came of it. The FBI takes over the situation with Lex, and Lex decides to make a deal to work with the FBI to take down Lionel. Finally someone is doing something about this scum of the earth. Lionel hires a new doctor and lets this doctor know that he has a rare liver disease and that he's dying. When he's alone, looking completely disheveled and exhausted, out of his mind, he takes out a gun and puts it in his mouth. And that is how the episode ends. This episode was a lot of fun and a thrilling mystery that was slowly pieced together in a way that kept me engaged and wondering how it all plays out. Like I said, this is one of the rare times this how we got here trope worked because it was a part of the story. Oh, and for those wondering how the call got sent to the past, something to do with the power lines touching kryptonite. I don't know the proper science behind it, but yeah, it's a fun episode. Honestly, you could watch it without knowing anything about Adam, and I think it works great as a standalone adventure. But let's move along to see what happens with Lionel in episode 17, Legacy. Except we don't, because this episode opens up with Jonathan doing work on the roof. Until he hears that noise that Clark hears when the key calls him. This causes Jonathan to fall off the roof, but Clark catches him. When Clark asks Jonathan if he's okay, Jonathan angrily responds by calling Clark Kal-El. Jonathan walks off frustrated. Now we see what's up with Lionel, and as he has his finger on the trigger, the phone rings. He finds out Clark is in the caves and goes to see him. They have an ominous chat. Both Jonathan and Lionel are becoming desperate and irrational. Jonathan becomes distant as Jor-El seems to be demanding his end of the deal that Jonathan made to get Clark home. Lionel's obsession with the caves is renewed, and he's doing all this testing and research as well as conducting an illegal raid of the Kent farm for the key. Clark is caught in the middle looking to figure it all out. Through this, he finds out Lex is working with the FBI. We also get to see Christopher Reeve as Virgil Swan again. Lionel visits Swan and seeks his help deciphering the language in the caves, but Swan says he can't help. Lionel offers him a deal, and initially Swan rejects it, but then agrees to something, we don't know what. This was a really cool scene of two titans verbally jousting, both in terms of actors and characters. Clark finds out Swan met with Lionel and accuses Swan of betraying him, but Swan assures Clark he didn't. He tells Clark he thought he was ready to learn about his heritage, but his actions over the past year prove he wasn't. Clark tells Swan about the message in the ship, about Clark being sent to Earth to conquer. Clark explains his father is now paying the price for his mistakes. Swan shows another message that he found which originated from Earth that says, "I am waiting." But he doesn't think it's for Clark. Jonathan confronts Lionel in the caves with a shotgun, and the two fight until the key, which Jonathan brought with him, activates and flies into the wall. Clark and Jonathan chat about what happened in the caves later, and Jonathan still refuses to tell Clark what kind of deal he made with Jor-El. The episode ends with Virgil Swan somehow having the key. I'm gonna be honest, I don't know how I feel about this episode. I think there was a lot going on, and it brought up many things that had been set up throughout the season, but few answers or resolutions. It's a progression episode, moving the story forward, but only slightly in my opinion. The tone of the episode is somber and serious, and I think the actors all do great with the material, but something about it just didn't click with me. Jonathan isn't hearing noises by the end of the episode, so he somehow satisfied the deal for now? I don't think so. So then what was the point? Virgil Swan gets the key, and sadly, there will be no resolution to that because Christopher Reeve passed away a few months after this episode was filmed. Lionel seems to be getting closer to uncovering Clark's secret, and that's unsettling. I don't know. I just feel like something is missing. It's not a bad episode, but I do wish we were given more insight into things considering all the questions it raises. I guess we'll still have to wait a bit to find out the truth of the matter, but the next episode, episode 18, Truth, sheds light on some other plots. I'm a big fan of this episode. It is a Chloe-centric episode and a lot of fun. Chloe gains the ability to get people to tell her the truth when she breaks into LuthorCorp one night and gets exposed to some toxin. This puts one of her teachers in her crosshairs as she wants to interview them for some award and ends up learning this teacher changed her identity because of a murder that happened when she was part of some radical group 30 years ago. She also gets clues to Clark's secret when she talks to Pete and Martha Kent, and they accidentally mention things about Clark. Clark, however, is able to intervene and keep the truth safe. Well, except for one time where she corners Pete and he ends up kissing her and telling her he's in love with her. Normally, I do an okay pause moment here, but I don't want to waste much time dissecting this. All I'll say is that Pete has rarely ever shown interest in Chloe other than maybe a few moments in the first season. Here was yet another story they could have given Pete, or at least another reason to be resentful towards Clark. Oh, and of course, Chloe's ability doesn't work on Clark, so he's still able to tell his terrible lies. Chloe keeps going though, and finds out that Lana applied to an art program in Paris because she basically wants a fresh start. But Chloe's crusade for the truth isn't done yet. She meets with Lex after Clark tells Lex what happened to her. Lex wants Chloe's help getting his memory back. Chloe pokes and prods Lex about why he continues to stay in Lionel's orbit, and Lex says it's because he wants his father to love him. This makes so much sense. Look, I'm not a therapist or a psychologist, but it's clear that Lex suffers from abandonment and a lack of affection. Even though his father is cruel, it's the only form of love, or rather approval, Lex knows of, since it's how he was raised. So he keeps seeking it out, even though deep down he probably knows he'll never get it. Continuing on with Chloe though, she gets Lionel to confess that he had her dad fired and that he got Morgan Edge to kill his own parents for the insurance money to start his company. She gets it recorded on her phone's voicemail, which is why she's able to escape with her life. But the truth can be dangerous, and the teacher who she exposed through a story in the Torch got arrested, and her son now wants to hurt Chloe. Chloe is also suffering the side effects from the truth gas, which includes awful headaches. She's driving and being pursued by the guy who attempts to drive her off a bridge. Clark gets there in time and saves her not only from falling off the bridge, but also with an antidote he got from a former LuthorCorp employee who worked on the project. Lana tells Clark she's leaving for Paris and says she didn't tell him sooner because he was the only person who could talk her out of it. Chloe checks her messages only to find one from Lionel saying there's no need to worry about their earlier conversation. What a scum. He erased it. Such a fun episode though. Chloe getting truth-telling abilities is the perfect power for her, and seeing it go to her head, making her feel justified in all her actions, was entertaining, along with all the opportunities she took to use it to get people to tell her the truth. I'll talk about it a lot more in my character analysis for the season, but the focus on Chloe being a reporter was a major highlight, and her realizing that there are limits to seeking out the truth because of the unintended consequences was a good lesson for her to learn. But secrets being revealed don't stop with this episode. There are more truths to be found out in the next one, episode 19, Memoria. Lex is desperate to get his missing 7 weeks back, and he has decided to undergo a procedure with Dr. Garner to do it. The procedure causes repressed memories to be brought to the surface of Lex's mind, sometimes during his day. The episode opens with one of these as we see Lex when he had the psychotic break as a kid we were told about in Shattered. Lex is found standing on the mansion's balcony screaming Julian's name. The next one is shown to us through the procedure where Lex gets put into a vat of liquid kryptonite or kryptonite-infused water. It's not exactly explained what it is, but it's something involving kryptonite, of course, because it's a green substance. Anyway, the memory. Lex's 12th birthday where no one showed up because Lex had no friends. Lionel, in a surprising display of seemingly genuine affection, humanity, and good parenting, gifts Lex a lead box, the same one Lex gave Clark to give Lana her necklace in season 1, and tells Lex to put all his fears and worries into this box. Following that, while having a conversation with Lionel, Lex has a memory of his parents fighting after his brother Julian was born. His mom says she didn't want more kids and fears Lionel will pit the boys against each other. Present day Lex says it was an accident, and then the next memory shows us Lex standing over Julian's crib crying. He explains he tried to rock Julian to get him to stop crying. Lionel checks on Julian and finds he's deceased, suffocated. He then hits Lex. I was not ready for this, but there's a missing piece of this memory which gets revealed at the end. Lex heard Julian crying while walking through the mansion and then suddenly stopped. So he rushed to the crib and found his mom standing over the crib holding a pillow. She then walks off and goes to bed, which is what happened before we saw Lex crying and Lionel walking in. So we've learned, as does Lionel when Lex tells him, that it was Lillian, Lex's mother, who killed Julian, not Lex, to protect Julian from Lionel's awful parenting. But Lex took the blame. He tells Lionel he did this because he knew that as Lionel's only heir, he would be safe. Well, relatively, but his mom wouldn't. Lionel attempts to say that if he had known, things could have been different. But Lex doesn't care to hear it. It's too late. And sure, we can sit here and think about what alternate universe Lionel and Lex would be like if this moment played out differently. Maybe Lionel would have been the father Lex always wanted. We don't know. But what we do know is that this version of Lionel is a grade A scumbag because he feigns concern for Lex to convince Clark to go stop Lex from continuing with the procedure, only for Dr. Garner to capture Clark and put him through the same treatment. Okay, pause. I can't remember if I addressed this before, but the show is so inconsistent with how kryptonite hurts Clark. Sometimes he gets a piece near him but can still crawl away. Sometimes he's completely incapacitated and unconscious. And sometimes he's put in a vat of it for minutes and somehow doesn't die. I don't know. I think being placed from head to toe in a vat of kryptonite or some kryptonite mixed substance should cause him severe harm. But the procedure plays out and we see Clark's first memory, which is his parents putting him in his ship and saying goodbye. Clark starts to have a seizure, causing the system to overload and explode. Lex gets back there and frees Clark from the container. The episode ends with Martha checking on Clark, who has been quiet since returning. He does mention to her that he learned his birth mother's name, Laura. Martha then tells Clark his first word was Laura, which is really sweet. It's a wholesome moment to end this incredibly intense episode, but oh goodness, this was so good. Getting Lex's backstory and in a way Lionel's origin villain story during the flashbacks, but also basically this entire season, it was harrowing and evocative and powerful. It's funny that this episode really didn't involve Clark much. He's kind of just there. This is all about Lex, much like this entire season has been, I feel, and it's been a heavy and chaotic journey for him as well as us, the viewers. The excitement continues with the next episode, episode 20, Talisman. Okay, so I don't think this episode is that exciting actually, but it is fun. An artifact is found by Lionel's team in the Kawachi Caves, and he asks Joseph Willowbrook for assistance in understanding it. Joseph has his student, Jeremiah, with him, and they say it's Pollock. When Lionel asks what that is, they claim it to be ancient cookware. Lionel wants his team to examine it, but Jeremiah refuses to return it. He's not fond of the white man invading his people's grounds, which is totally fair. He hits the artifact with a rock to reveal a blade, and when he grabs it, he's imbued with super strength, invulnerability, super speed, and we find out later also heat vision. And he has control over these powers immediately. Okay, pause. This part confuses me. Usually when people get powers, they have to learn how to use them. We literally see Clark struggle to use his powers, as well as other characters. But Jeremiah doesn't even flinch once he gets them. He just starts using them with ease. Where's the montage? Where's the training? Gosh, this is just like Rey Skywalker. I'm kidding. I love Rey, and don't think she's a Mary Sue. But Jeremiah, he's just that good, it seems. I guess he's him. Him being Naaman, that dude from the prophecy. Y'all remember that, right? That's what Jeremiah thinks, at least. But Professor Willowbrook thinks Clark is continuously referring to Clark as Naaman. Okay, pause again. This is interesting to me because Clark tells Willowbrook not to call him that, just like he told Dr. Swan not to call him Kal-El. All these people are imposing what they believe is Clark's destiny on him. Now, obviously, Clark is Kal-El, but he has no connection to his Kryptonian heritage, so that name is foreign to him. He even says to Swan, I don't know who that is, but he is constantly being told by others, Willowbrook, Swan, Jor-El, who he is supposed to be. Meanwhile, Jonathan tells him he gets to decide that. This is his struggle for the entire series, understanding and deciding who he wants to be. I like the small ways they highlight this struggle with moments like this. Anyway, the prophecy says that anyone of the Kawachi who hold the blade get powers to protect it until they can give it to Naaman. The prophecy also predicts that if Sagith, Naaman's true enemy, grabs it, it will disintegrate. This is important. Clark gets Jeremiah to see him and attempts to use kryptonite on him, but it doesn't work. Instead, Jeremiah stabs Clark right in the chest, and it hurts him? So the blade is made of Kryptonian metal? Or something similar? Clark is bleeding out on the floor as Jeremiah goes after Lionel, who he believes is Sagith. Clark's parents find him inside the house on the floor and tend to his wound. When Jonathan puts his hands over the wound, he heals Clark. How? It seems it happened by Jor-El using Jonathan as a vessel. That's what Jonathan somehow extrapolates from that moment. Clark goes after Jeremiah, and the two have a really cool fight. Clark swings a tree like a baseball bat and hits Jeremiah. Amazing. They both super speed at each other and collide, which causes Jeremiah to let go of the dagger. It flies into the air and lands right in front of Lionel and Lex, who came to save his father. They both go to grab it, but it crumbles. So, who is Sagith? Lex? Lionel? Both? We'll have to watch more to find out. And by more, I mean the rest of the series, not just the season. Two other things of note. Pete finds out his parents are getting a divorce and he's really angry and upset, which, yeah, understandable, but I don't care, dude. Also, Lana finds out that Lex is selling the Talon since she's leaving, and when Lex tells her that it really wasn't lucrative, she asks him why he kept it this whole time, and he responds, I did it for you. Which, nope, Lex, stop. You are not escaping these allegations of predatory behavior. Anyway, an exciting episode for sure that once again spotlights Clark's impending destiny and his questions and concerns surrounding it. It's nothing special, but it is an enjoyable episode. And it's definitely more enjoyable than the next one, the second to last episode of the season, episode 21, Forsaken. So Lana is preparing to leave, but some people don't want her to go. Those people being Clark and Emily, Lana's childhood friend, the one who drowned but then got cloned and has super speed. You remember Emily, right? We catch up with her and she's a teenager now, 1 whole year later. Some rapid cell growth thing which apparently also lets her phase through walls. which is how she escapes. She kidnaps Lana to keep her from leaving. Clark has a bit of a different, less kidnappy approach to get her to stay. He decides he's going to tell Lana a secret. He invites Lana for dinner, but obviously she's a bit preoccupied being held hostage by Emily. He saves her, of course, and ultimately decides not to tell her. And this is partially because of the things Pete says, as well as what happens to him in this episode. He gets taken by the FBI agent Lex is working with, who is actually working for Lionel because Lionel's hands are in every pocket. He assaults Pete to get Pete to share Clark's secret, but Pete doesn't break. However, this incident pushes Pete to leave Smallville with his mom, who is moving to Wichita. He tells Clark how difficult it is to keep Clark's secret and that he could never live with himself if he betrayed Clark. So he'd rather not take that risk. And I think this ultimately leads to Clark choosing not to tell Lana. I really wish they gave Pete more stories like this, or at least honed in on his fear of telling Clark's secret more. When given actual substance, Sam Jones performs really well and Pete becomes more interesting as it highlights the friendship that the show tells us he has with Clark. But Lex and Chloe are Clark's friends that get real focus, so it doesn't feel like Clark and Pete are actually best friends. While searching for Emily, Clark tells Chloe that Lex is working with the FBI, which encourages Chloe to reveal to Lex that she has Lionel's confession about murdering his parents. Apparently, it's not so easy to delete a voicemail. Lex confronts his father in his office at Luthor Corp and tells Lionel he's gotten careless. Then the FBI walk in, including the guy who pretended to work for Lex but was working for Lionel, and they arrest Lionel. Finally! Justice! Yes! Let's go. I've been waiting for this moment. Oh my goodness. But we still have one episode left, so maybe I shouldn't get ahead of myself. Before I jump into our season finale, I thought this episode was okay overall. I do like the exploration of the idea of people not being able to let go with both Emily and Clark. But while Emily couldn't let go, Clark realized he needed to, especially seeing the burden it is to Pete. But now, Clark is losing two of his closest friends. This could cause a drastic change in the dynamic of the show. But before we see if it does, we have one more episode to discuss. Episode 22, the season finale, Covenant. So there's been a lot building in this season, and it all comes to a head in this episode. First, there's the growing distance between Lana and Clark that has played a huge part in Lana's decision to leave Smallville. She does ask Clark if he can give her a ride to the airport and offers him one last chance to tell him the truth because she knows that him telling her he wants her to be happy was not what he wanted to tell her. But Clark doesn't say anything. Then there's Lionel's crimes, and Chloe and Lex both looking to escape Lionel's control. He has a hearing to determine if he can post bail, and Clark tells Lex he'll testify as an eyewitness who saw Lionel increase the voltage of the electroshock therapy on Lex against the doctor's warnings that it could have irreparable damage to Lex. Lex and Chloe are concerned about what Lionel may do since he's now in a desperate situation. Lionel does tell Lex about his illness, but this doesn't change Lex's conviction to put Lionel away for good. We also have the deal Jonathan made with Jor-El that has been creeping up throughout the season. Jonathan has been quiet about what the deal was, and we've seen how it has caused issues in the Kent household. And of course, part of this has to do with Clark's guilt for what happened the previous summer, as well as his constant defiance of Jor-El. And all of this unfolds in dramatic fashion, put into motion with the arrival of a young woman with powers like Clark, a young woman named Kara. Wait, Kara? As in Kara from Krypton? Clark's cousin? Kara? Well, that second part we don't know for sure, though that is who Clark tells Lana Kara is. Okay, pause. Before I go further, I just want to say, I'm not a fan of this actress. I don't know if it's how she was directed to play the role or just the way the role was designed, but it doesn't work for me. She's definitely meant to be distant and cold, almost robotic or under control, but I actually think her delivery is not the best. It's not awful, but I personally find it distracting. Anyway, Kara tells Clark that she came through a passage in the cave wall, is from Krypton, and she's here to take Clark home. I'm not sure what she means, because Krypton is no more. Clark refuses to go with her the entire episode. He is Clark, not Kal-El, and Smallville is his home. But things at home are starting to fall apart. First of all, Lana is leaving, so that's no fun. Then Kara pushes Jonathan to share with the class the deal he made with Jor-El, and it was that if Jor-El gave Jonathan the ability to bring Clark back home, he would one day return Clark to Jor-El. This is a devastating moment for the Kents. Jonathan naively thought this day may never come or it wouldn't come soon. Martha is understandably upset, but they do talk it out, which is always nice to see that they can always work things out. On top of this, Lionel sends Clark a key to a room in Lex's mansion. The room in question? Lex's obsessed with Clark room, where he has large images of Clark and all the research and information from his investigation into everything surrounding Clark, from the car crash to the caves. Clark is pissed. He eats Lex up, saying he always defended Lex to Pete and his parents, saying Lex is nothing like his father, but he realizes he was wrong. Because of this, Clark forgets to take Lana to the airport and rushes over, but she's already there and she's being sent off by Lex. Clark watches from afar with a rose in his hand. Lana sees Clark and runs towards him, but he's gone by the time she reaches the spot, finding only the rose on the ground. Clark does still show up to testify, which does ensure Lionel doesn't get bail, but he tells Lex that their friendship is over. Earlier, Kara had warned Clark that all his friends would lie, leave, or betray him, and Clark feels it has all come true. Now, he feels he has nothing left here, and he decides to go with her. One thing that does leave me suspicious of Kara is that Clark keeps asking questions, and her only answer is, "Everything will be revealed to you once you go." That and the fact that she somehow vaporized the FBI agent that was working for Lionel because she caught him spying on them. When did Kryptonians get that power? Anyway, Clark and Kara head to the caves as Chloe brings Jonathan the results of a DNA test he asked her to do of a cup Kara was holding. Something is up. Also, pause. When Jonathan goes to Chloe to ask her for this favor, he visits her at the torch during the day when there is light out and there are other people around. When Lionel visits Chloe, he goes at night when it's dark and no one else is around. This contrast in approach is all you need to understand these two characters. But back to the plot. Jonathan gets to the caves as Clark and Kara open up one of the cave walls with a bright yellow light shining through it. Jonathan tells Clark that this girl is not Kara, but someone named Lindsay, and she's not from Krypton. Her and her mother were driving around the caves during the day of the meteor shower, and the car got a direct hit from a meteor. It seems Jor-El preserved her body this entire time, or something, because Jonathan says Jor-El used her, stripped her of her humanity, and stole her life, all to lure Clark to him. Jor-El calls for Clark to go with Kara, but Clark rejects it. He says he'll never be who Jor-El wants him to be. Then Kara, Lindsay, whatever her name is absorbed by the light. I don't know exactly what happened, but Jor-El said she has served her purpose, and so is Jonathan. Jonathan is then attacked by a rope of energy or something. Clark then submits and decides to go to Jor-El to spare Jonathan's life. He's absorbed or goes through the opening in the cave. I think I hate Jor-El. He might be worse than Lionel. Hyperbole, of course, but he's close. Threatening to kill a man to force your son to do what you want? That is heinous. That is despicable. That is evil. There are few good father figures in this show, apparently. The closing moments of the episode show us Lionel getting his head shaved as Martha runs out of the house to see that the field has caught fire in the shape of a Kryptonian symbol. Chloe and her father enter their house only for it to blow up, which, what? Wait, huh? And Lex takes a drink and apparently gets poisoned because he starts choking and then falls through a glass table, which is insane. And okay, pause. Look, when I say I love Smallville, I mean it's kind of my obsession. I remember so much about this show, from really random moments to obscure guest characters that are relevant for only one episode. And I especially remember the major stories. So I was shocked to see Lex get poisoned because I do not remember this at all. And what that tells me is that him being poisoned must get resolved pretty easily or quickly, because if it was a major plot point, which it feels like it would be since this is one of the final scenes in the season finale, surely they would have followed up in the next season with some big story about it. But I don't recall that being the case. I might be wrong though. So we see Jonathan unconscious in the caves, Lionel now done getting his haircut, and Clark completely naked, curled up in some dark void, immersed in something that is shaped like the Superman symbol. And Jor-El says, now he will be reborn. I have no clue what that last scene was, but wow, what an episode, what a finale. The slow deterioration of Clark's faith in the people in his life was difficult but compelling to watch. And while we find out that Kara isn't Kara, we've seen Clark's deep desire to feel understood and be seen for who he is in his entirety, and in a way, his parents and friends can never give him that. So it makes sense how he could be enticed and hoodwinked to believe in this girl and what she's selling, though it was just really Jor-El. As I explained in the beginning of this episode, there are a lot of stories that have been built up throughout the season, some better than others, that culminated in this finale. The Chloe and Lex versus Lionel plot, Lana feeling stuck and wanting to do and be more, Jonathan's deal with Jor-El, and Clark's constant doubt about whether or not he belongs here. I'll be honest, I didn't remember season 3 that well in general, so watching it was refreshing. I do think a good chunk of it wanes and loses the plot a bit, but the last 6 episodes overall do a really great job of progressing the story and escalating the conflict. Let's really break down the season by exploring the characters, starting with my favorite character of the season, Chloe. After the first 2 seasons of Chloe not being too important, I was surprised to see how much focus she gets this season, and I enjoyed all of it. The story of Chloe making one rash decision in a really vulnerable moment that now leaves her trapped under Lionel's control, and her using her investigative skills to desperately find a way out, was a lot of fun to watch. I would have loved more of this in the previous seasons. Season 1 was fine, her reporting all the strange things that happen in the town and these kryptonite-infected people, it was cool. Season 2, instead of making her pine for Clark incessantly, she could have been gradually chasing bigger stories. Remember when the sheriff framed Jonathan for attempting to murder Lionel? What if Chloe was on the case, chasing down leads and having Clark help her find the truth? But I love what we got this season, and her collaboration with Lex to take down Lionel was unexpected, but welcomed. I don't recall these two having any significant screen time together in any other season. There may be some scenes and moments here and there that we get, but this is probably the only season where they are intertwined by an overarching story, and it was great to see. I especially loved the episode Truth. I just thought it fit her character so well and served the greater story of people revealing information that is kept so secret, because that's what hurts these people, all the lies and secrets. So it was refreshing to see people just blurt their truths out. There was also the true establishment of Chloe and Clark's friendship. They were at a rocky place in the beginning, all the way until Clark found out Chloe was still working with Lionel, but they worked through it, and they truly have become confidants and best friends. I love their dynamic and the way it has evolved as the show has continued. But will it continue? After that explosion, I don't know. Now, as much as I love Chloe this season, I hate Lionel just as much, probably even more. He is my least favorite character for the 2nd season in a row. I thought he was bad last season, but he's diabolical and inhumane this season. I mean, blackmailing and exploiting Chloe, a teenage girl, to spy on a teenage boy, experimenting on humans and playing with their lives as he did with Adam, and of course, drugging his own son, orchestrating this elaborate plot to make him seem insane, then admitting him to a mental institution and making him undergo electroshock therapy. This is beyond cruel. It's reprehensible. I do love that the show gives no sympathy to Lionel's plight of this liver disease. We're not made to feel bad for him, and so much of what I just said he did because of this. The other part, the violence against his own son, was to protect himself from justice. Oh, and finding out about Julian and his wife and how cruel and abusive he's always been, It was horrific. He's the worst. All of this does further highlight the contrast between Jonathan and Lionel's parenting and how that leads to Lex and Clark becoming who they're destined to be. It gives a lot of sympathy and perspective to Lex's eventual villainy and even the actions he takes now at this point in the story. And that I appreciate a lot, as well as John Glover's brilliant acting, because my goodness, his ability to be smug, arrogant, egotistical, manipulative, and faux-loving and concerned, it makes me hate Lionel. Now let's talk about all the other characters, starting with Pete. This is it for Pete. He has moved away and he's gone from the show, and it makes no real impact on the story or the dynamics. I mentioned Clark and Chloe have now solidified their bond as friends, and so Chloe takes up the role that Pete was there for, and Chloe has way more significance to Clark's life and the show. Pete made less of an impact than Whitney. At least Whitney was an antagonist for Clark and had some story that ran for a few episodes. Pete was just there. It's sad because, like I said, there was an opportunity to create some understandable tension between Clark and Pete that could have ran through the season. And I know I said maybe they could have made Pete an antagonist to Clark, but I take that back. I like how loyal Pete is to Clark. Still, like Chloe, they could have given Pete and Clark some tension, especially when the material was right there. Pete's jealousy and insecurity of being in Clark's shadow could have led him to make some bad decisions that affected their friendship for at least a quarter of the season, but oh well, one less superfluous character. Bye, Pete. Next, we have Martha Kent. She's still just being lovely as always, giving Clark support. They actually have a few scenes in particular of her comforting him and talking to him about his concerns that I really enjoy. It's nothing major, but it definitely plays a part in shaping the choices Clark makes and the person he chooses to be. So, it's worth mentioning. Jonathan, on the other hand, has an important role this season, and that is because of the deal he made with Jor-El and its lasting impact both on him and Clark. Firstly, there's the fact that he suffered a heart attack. Jonathan dying from a heart attack has been done in a few versions of Superman, so I wonder how many people watching this season thought this would be when he died. But anyway, his decision to get Jor-El's help, which meant giving him powers, causes his body to weaken. And then the deal he made and Jor-El warning him and basically demanding he pay up definitely put a strain on the Kents. As always, Jonathan wants to protect his family at all costs, especially his son from being controlled by Jor-El and his warnings. To see him go to somewhat extreme lengths, including attacking Lionel because of Lionel's meddling in the caves, shows how much he loves his son, but also how much this whole ordeal is affecting him mentally. He's not always thinking straight. He's scared about losing Clark, and he's also concerned for Clark because of what Clark has to deal with. This season highlights the love that Jonathan has for Clark in a major way, and that is always powerful to see. Love for one's son is unfortunately not something Lex can relate to because, wow, Lex went through hell this season. Look, I've made it abundantly clear that I don't have much sympathy for Lex, but damn it, he did not deserve anything he went through this season. I'm not going to recap it yet again, but how could he not look at everything his father did to him and feel he's unworthy of love? If your own father would risk your life to protect his, how could you imagine you're deserving of any love if the man who helped bring you to life doesn't seem to care for you? I liked how Lex was not a bystander in his life against his father, and also stopped believing Lionel would ever approve of or love him. He sought out the truth about Lionel twice. It was great to see that he decided enough was enough. It was time to stop expecting that his father would actually love him and care for him. Lex realized that Lionel would only ever care about himself, and he made a difficult and brave choice to step out of that shadow and work to give Lionel what he deserved. I was on board with Lex this season, but ultimately, Lex can't escape his father's ingrained behaviors, and that has put him and Clark at odds, it seems. We'll see if they can work things out, though. I feel bad for what Lex went through in the story, but I feel worse for how Lana's character was treated by the writing. Her primary story was the fallout of her relationship with Clark and the tension between the two. Yes, there was Adam, but he wasn't all that relevant to her story. He shows up and befriends Lana, quickly becomes threatening to her, and then is gone, shows up again, and dies. The main issue this season was her still thinking maybe Clark and her can work out, that she can get Clark to open up. There are numerous scenes of her and Clark talking where she's giving him a chance to be vulnerable and he keeps pulling away. I think this is a real low point for the relationship in terms of the writing. They have lower points in the story, but in terms of writing, in terms of the creative element, there wasn't much happening here, and that's what she was relegated to. Well, that and still being the target of people's affection and obsession, but it made sense that she finally decided to stop waiting around for something. She even acknowledges this to Clark in Legacy, saying she's been so focused on Clark that maybe she's missed out on opportunities. And while I think that realization is great and that story is interesting, they didn't tell it well this season. She kept reaching out to Clark, but maybe they needed to show her actually missing out on opportunities or giving things up. Maybe she could have considered dating Adam after they got really close, but chooses not to because of Clark. I don't know. I just think her character had really bad writing this season. But now she's off to Paris, so we'll see what this new experience brings for her next season. And finally, it's time to talk about Clark. I thought his relationships were tested in season 2, but season 3 really pushed them to the edge, some even falling off the cliff, it appears, as he's no longer friends with Lex. Plus, Pete and Lana have left, both of which are rooted in something related to Clark. And then there's Jonathan's health, which is tied to Jor-El and Clark running away to Metropolis. Clark is carrying immense guilt about that still, as he brings it up a few times throughout the season. Speaking of Jor-El, his defiance of his father has led to serious consequences, and I guess it was only time before Clark would surrender, though Jor-El forced his hand by almost killing Jonathan. There's also the fact that Lionel got close to finding out Clark's secret, and Lex actually found out. Fortunately, he doesn't remember due to the shock treatment. The point is that Clark is entering dangerous territory with a lot of the people in his life because it's becoming increasingly more difficult to keep them at arm's length and out of his privacy. All the while, Jor-El and others are telling Clark who he should be, and Clark doesn't know. He's still on that journey of self-discovery and doesn't want to be told who he should be. That's why it's important he has Jonathan and Martha who encourage him to explore and figure out who he wants to be. And that discovery comes with making mistakes, which Clark is learning too. He's experienced a lot and grown so much already, but he's still got a long way to go. And we'll see how he progresses on his journey in season 4. Season 3 has had the most serious and mature tone in the show so far, and it makes sense. The characters are changing immensely and questioning things about themselves and the people around them. Relationships are becoming both stronger and weaker, and people are figuring out who they can rely on and who they can't. I do think things got messy this season in the middle, but the follow-through of a lot of the major stories, specifically Lex and Lionel with Chloe as well, and Clark's struggles with Jor-El, were exciting to see play out. Clark has been tested in some major ways, both in regards to his powers, but also with his relationships. In some ways, he's succeeded. In others, not so much. He's now being aggressively pushed towards his destiny with many people telling him what to do, and he's doing everything he can to resist it. He's not ready nor willing and still believes he can just have his normal farm boy life. But we all know that there are greater things in store for him. Will he continue to fight it, or will he begin to embrace it? And what happened to Lex and Chloe? Will Lana go to Paris and become a painter, and we never hear from her again? We'll have to see how it all plays out in season 4 next time. Until then, much love.